I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land so lovely earth can stand. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell.
Hi.
And
Which camera's looking at me today?
isn't this a wonderful way of doing things? Energy Week stems from the work that I do on energy every week, every day. I start out my day doing about 3 hours of news analysis, and I also write for Green Energy Times. The news analysis turns into news entries at a blog called geoharvey.wordpress.com, and you're welcome to go there and look at the news every day if you wish. I put up about 10 to 15 news articles, and it gives me the opportunity to be pretty much up to date on what's going on. And one of the things that we were just talking about is the fact that I happen to be more optimistic than a lot of people about global warming and energy, but we'll see. Anyway, we will start with the 6th, which is actually the day of our last news show, Energy Week show. There is material that came in later that day. And the first comes from Clean Technica. Cape Cod is one step closer, they say, to getting its first offshore wind farm, a project that's been trying to get off the ground for more than a decade, really, more than a decade. Now there are indications that it may be commissioned by 2016. I think that's the one that Teddy Kennedy opposed.
Oh yeah, the Kennedys were violently opposed. All of the Kennedys didn't like it.
Yeah, interesting.
That kind of mystifies me, really. I'm going to pull up a picture here.
A picture of an offshore wind farm?
Yeah. Supposedly this is in Romania.
Yeah, the Romanians have
but
been
I don't
doing
know
just
that it
amazing
is.
work.
I mean, there's another picture I saw that was supposedly off the west coast of Europe, and it looks identical to this.
Well, the water looks a lot alike.
But once you see these things, they all tend to look alike. I
Yeah.
mean, they're made similarly. They might even come from the same factories.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at this picture here, and I don't find anything objectionable about that. I think it's almost pretty.
You've got an alternative, you see, and the alternative is a coal plant with 600-foot tall stacks that have black.
How can you not love a coal plant? I mean, it's so scenic. I loved going down toward Holyoke. You can see the old plant. They've converted to gas now.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks so good with all the rail cars, all the coal cars there.
You're making people say, what does he really believe about this? What kind of taste has he got? That's okay, Tom. We'll let you get away with it. Anyway, the next item. Do you have a picture of Chipotle?
I think I do. Yeah. Let's pull Chipotle up here.
Chipotle Mexican Grill says guacamole and some salsas. What does this have to do with energy? Could become victims of global warming. There you go. The restaurant chain, in an annual report, listed drought and global weather change among the long list of business risks faced. And what they're doing is they're saying these things are the ones that are most likely to be made hard to get, too expensive, whatever. That report was in CNN on the 6th of March. And again, if you go to geoharvey.wordpress.com, you can see these reports.
Yeah, I couldn't pull that one up for some reason. CNN wouldn't download.
They're getting smart about not allowing that. Really, some of them you can't highlight text.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, going on to the next day. Or did you have a picture of guacamole? You do.
Up there.
Wow.
It's not much.
It's not much.
I got this off their website.
Okay. This is from Chipotle Mexican restaurant?
Yeah. Green is the new green is a picture of a little
well, how do you like that?
Little Chipotle. I guess I haven't been in one because that doesn't look familiar to me.
It doesn't look familiar to me.
It looks like a refurbished McDonald's.
It looks like a gas station. Okay. On the 7th of March, Iowa, the top state for wind, is edging close to 30%. Remember those days when years not that long ago, like a year ago, when they were saying you can't run more than 20% renewable on the grid because it'll destabilize it? Well, they're up to 30% now. Last year it got 27% of electricity from wind, followed by South Dakota with 26%. With 5,117 megawatts installed, 1.4 million Iowan homes are supplied with clean energy. You're trying there to get to something, aren't you?
I'm trying to see if I had anything appropriate.
Ah, okay. Well, if you find something, let me know, and we'll go back to that.
Well, I just had that one picture of the wind, because you've seen one, you've seen them all. They do look very similar.
They do. My daughter went to Wales, and she said, Wales is beautiful. It has mountains, and the mountains are covered with sheep and wind turbines.
Well, Ireland is covered with wind turbines, too.
Ireland, too, and Scotland. Yeah, they're all over. And Ireland, they're talking about building huge numbers of them in order to supply England with electric power. And then you see what happens is, like the Russians invade the Ukraine and say, if you don't let us do what we're going to do, we're going to shut off your natural gas to the Europeans. Yeah, well, you see, the Irish could do that to the English. Be turning the tables.
They wouldn't do a thing like that.
No, I don't think they would. Never. Not the Irish. They don't have any.
St. Patrick's Day, Brett. We're not going to let you have any power today.
Yeah. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, I don't know how to pronounce Chinese, I'm sorry to say, has declared war on pollution, outlining significant steps the Chinese government will take to improve air quality. China has suffered from truly epic smog over the last 2 winters, and the pictures that I've seen of China are just astonishing.
I don't have them here. Last week I had some pictures, people walking around with masks on their faces.
Well, my son married a Vietnamese girl in Saigon. And I'm told that everybody there calls it Saigon, not Ho Chi Minh City. But my daughter went for the wedding. I didn't go because I don't travel well. She said she was really glad I didn't go because it was a 24-hour trip just to get there. But she said that about half the people on the street were wearing masks, and about half of the masks had American flags on them.
No kidding.
Yeah. And women would walk up to her and they'd want to touch her hair.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't straight. It was very curly, and they wanted to see if it was, I don't know, maybe they thought it was a Brillo pad and they just wanted to check it out. Okay, green business will drive 1/3 of the UK economy growth this year. That's kind of amazing. A UK diplomat had predicted this. Now, Bharat Joshi, this is a good English name, said climate-friendly growth, quote, represents one of the biggest opportunities since the Industrial Revolution, end quote, in an industry conference in Chennai.
That doesn't sound English either.
No, it doesn't. But it doesn't. He's just making a prediction about the UK economy. It doesn't have to be in England or the UK. On the 8th of March, more than 90, actually the number was 91, Illinois cities and towns provide all renewable energy to their utility customers. Now this is interesting. They have, in Illinois, and there are a total of six states that do this, the municipalities have the right to organize utilities, and they can buy the power from whomever they want.
So the municipality distributes it?
Yeah,
okay. Which
is interesting because it means that the municipality has a source of income there.
Yeah.
But they can decide where they're going to get their power from. And these people have gone to, I would guess it's probably a combination of everything. You know, that
I would expect. Since they got their choice, they're going to use like a Chinese menu.
Yeah,
one
absolutely.
From column A, two from
absolutely.
column B.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're choosing renewables.
They're choosing renewables. They're choosing an all renewable mix.
Now, you suppose this is for economic reasons or for
I think in
political
some
reasons?
cases it's economic reasons.
Yeah.
I saw some stuff today that was amazing. It's not in this group of news items because the news items were put together before I came to this, but Austin, Texas signed a contract for a 20-year contract for 120 megawatts of renewable power. And it was solar, 120 megawatts of solar.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, but of course what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep their peak demand costs down.
Under control.
Right. And they signed a 20-year contract for solar power at less than 5 cents per kilowatt hour.
Well, when you figure out what they had been spending for peak power,
That's amazing. Yeah, they were probably spending at least 15 cents per kilowatt. I mean, this
probably
is
significantly more than that.
huge savings for them. But the thing that's interesting is everybody says, well, solar's too expensive. Why did they go to solar? Partly because it was very inexpensive. You know, I tell people if your data is more than 6 months old, it's probably old.
Yeah.
And this is the way it is. But
Just run quickly about the difference between baseline power and peaking power.
baseline and peaking. Well, the best example that I know of this is the natural gas. Okay, there are natural gas baseline plants and there are natural gas peaking plants.
Okay.
And the baseline plants are basically like coal burning plants. To a certain extent, they're like nuclear plants.
They're running all the time.
They're running all the time, all the time. They've got. You can think of it as having a boiler that is so big it will take days to get it up to temperature. So they can't slow it down at night.
Right.
So they have to keep it going full blast in order to provide power for the peak demand the next day. Excuse me. And the cost of doing that is that they've got power at night that they have to do something with. You can't just dump power.
No, you got to do something to save it, or
yeah.
you can't.
You can't just can't just put it on the grid and say, here it is, gang, go for it.
That will destabilize the grid.
That would destabilize the grid, and that's the way those big peaking baseload plants work. And then you have, in fact, you know, Tom, if you think about it, people talk about intermittent power.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I'm coughing, but I know Roland is not going to take this out, so everybody's just going to have to live with it. Those big plants have to run all night. So all night long, they've got power that has to go on the grid, and it just goes. And somebody's going to have to take that power. So the result...
They got the price.
What they do is they cut the price. They actually have it at auction.
Yeah,
And
well, that's done automatically, but yeah, it is at auction.
It's at auction. And of course, this means that a factory, for example, if it can buy wholesale power, can buy this power at a very much reduced rate. Well, how reduced? Power prices in the Midwest today very often go negative at night. They're paying you to take the power. And the reason why they're paying you to take the power is because they want to be able to sock it to whoever is going to pay for power in the following afternoon and get the highest...
When the air conditioners are all
When the air conditioners are going, when the factories are running and so forth. And what happens is that even that isn't enough. So they've got these natural gas plants that are based on turbines that can be turned on very quickly.
It's basically a jet engine.
It's basically a jet engine, that's right. And they can turn them on in about 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. I would imagine there's some that are faster than that, but if they need power, they can get it really fast. The problem is those plants are very expensive.
Yep.
And it costs a lot of money to run them. So the power you get out of those, there's no point in turning it on unless you're going to get, at least 25, 30 cents per kilowatt hour out of those things.
I've heard numbers like 50, 75 cents.
Yes, and in fact, I tell people this, it's almost unbelievable. The lowest price I've seen for power the lowest price I've seen quoted, because I don't pay this myself. The lowest price is negative $100 per megawatt hour. That's negative 10 cents per kilowatt hour. The highest price.
So it's paying you a dime to take it.
That's right.
And what you do with it is your business.
Yeah, this is wholesale power.
Yes.
And the highest price I've seen for power, again seen quoted, is $11,000 per megawatt hour. It's $11 per kilowatt hour. Outrageous. But what happened? A coal burning plant suddenly went offline, and all of a sudden they had to get power from whoever would give it to them, you know. And at $11 per kilowatt hour, you know, you can probably talk people into pedaling bicycles to generate the power. But the point is, the so-called baseline power plant is not a better match to grid demand than renewable intermittent power, which is why Vermont Yankee was built, and at the same time Northfield Mountain was built. Same time Vermont Yankee was coming online, so is Northfield Mountain. Northfield Mountain is pumped storage. They buy that power at night that they can get really cheap.
Or they can even get paid to take it.
Or they even get paid to take it. I don't think that happens very often in New England. But they use it to pump water to the top of a mountain. Yeah. And then during the daytime, they run that water down through a turbine, and it generates power.
Actually, to me, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not economical in terms of how much power is produced, because they're using more power than they're delivering. But they're using power that is very, very cheap and delivering power that's expensive, so they can make money doing it.
So high.
Huh? Exactly, exactly. So maybe we should go on. What do you think?
Okay, let's go.
A relatively low-cost means of converting carbon dioxide into methanol has been developed by researchers from Stanford University, SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. I wonder what they're involved in this accelerator? And the Technical University of Denmark. And that was in Clean Technica. And
I saw that. I don't think I was able to take down anything significant, but this is big.
Well,
people are working on stuff exactly like this.
That's right.
Somebody's going to hit it and hit it right.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you can buy power for negative prices, you don't have to be very efficient in this to make money.
Correct.
So, and Paul Sabatier figured out a way to do this in 1913. So this is old technology. If you're just turning carbon dioxide into methanol. And actually, Paul Sabatier didn't do carbon dioxide to methanol. He did carbon dioxide to methane. This might be related to the Fischer-Tropsch catalysis system. Don't know.
Yeah. But the point is, a lot of guys are working on stuff like this.
Yeah.
And they never did it before because gasoline was king.
Oh.
Now they're looking at alternatives that
Right.
are starting to make economic
Right.
sense.
In the old days, in the 1930s, when they started, you know, everybody started driving gasoline-powered cars, and oil was used for all kinds of things. A barrel of oil cost $3.50. You know, and when the price of oil gets very, very high, this business of manufacturing synthetic fuels becomes very, very attractive.
I just found out recently that gasoline was a byproduct. It was something they used to throw away. They were looking for lamp oil.
Yeah, well, yes.
Way back.
Yeah, gasoline is not good lamp oil. That was the thing that they used to have explosions.
Oh, yeah.
In the lamps, because the kerosene was
it's stable enough to not explode.
Well, they would make kerosene that was not good.
Oh.
And then if somebody would put it in a lamp, and the lamp would explode. I remember American Heritage magazine having they had a thing about epitaphs, and amusing epitaphs. Here lies the body of Jonathan Mound, lost at sea and never found. But there was one about a woman who was killed in an explosion that happened because she was using this, whatever the brand was, of non-explosive lamp oil. But it was, you know, it's a lot cheaper than whale oil.
Yeah.
And I think from certain points of view, a lot more ecologically sound, although it isn't ecologically sound. But there it is. Okay. Going to the 9th of March. Now, there's a couple of these things. Oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking this was something else. From the Desmog blog, we see America's energy infrastructure is dangerously vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, according to a new report released by the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office. The GAO says this. Well, this goes right in with the Pentagon, which is saying exactly the same thing. Climate change, according to the Pentagon, is one of the super big security issues of the 21st century, and for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that it could cause wars. I have hope that people are going to realize that we're all in this together, and that there are better ways of dealing with it than going to war. But yeah, one of the examples here is the nuclear industry. Nuclear plants are all on bodies of water, or almost all. They're all on bodies of water.
Pretty much they need water.
They need water. There are a couple of them that are not on natural bodies of water, but they have artificial bodies of water for them. They need to be able to dissipate the heat. Vermont Yankee, about 60%, perhaps more than 60% of the heat that they produce is waste. So they need to have that water that dissipated into the Connecticut River and into the atmosphere, which is why they have those long rows of cooling towers.
Yep.
But yeah, they're more than 60% of the heat that they generate from the nuclear reaction is waste heat. And one of the engineers there actually told me that they had calculated that if they could get the heat that they wasted to the houses in Vermont, they would be able to heat every house in Vermont.
I believe that, but nobody's working on something like that.
About what? Nobody's working on it. Well, the problem, of course, is heat is not something that's easy to distribute.
Well, they're doing a pretty good job of it in Europe.
Well, yeah, except on, I mean, how much is it going to cost to put pipes in at Vermont Yankee to heat Burlington?
We're too far spread out.
We're too spread out. And the other thing is, nuclear plants are particularly bad at this because nobody wants a nuclear plant in the city they live in. So, you know, Indian Point is too close to New York.
Boy, isn't it?
and you know, one of the things that happened when Fukushima happened, and the head of the NRC said that he wanted all Americans to be at least 50 miles from the nuclear plant. The calculation, what is 50 miles? What line in New York City is 50 miles from Indian Point? It turns out there's a couple of blocks of New York City that are more than 50 miles. And they're all at the very southernmost tip of Staten Island. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
You know, when I was a kid, Indian Point was a park.
Really?
And it was a neat park.
Really?
The way they had a series of boats called the Hudson River Dayline.
Okay.
And they were like Mississippi steamboat
yes,
kind of thing.
Yes.
They went up and down the river.
I remember hearing about those
And
things.
you went down to 59th Street, New York. You got on one of these things, and it would take you. One of the boats went all the way up to Albany.
Albany, wow.
But Indian Point and Bear Mountain Park were two of the places where they would stop, and you could, you know, hang out there.
Bear Mountain Park is really nice.
It's nice, yeah. And Indian Point was the same thing, and a beautiful pool.
Yeah. That's too bad.
And
oh well.
Now it has changed somewhat.
Yeah. Yep, it has changed. Okay, also on the 9th, and this from Clean Technica, solar PV heavyweight SunEdison is expecting a huge surge in the number of large PV power plant projects completed this year.
Oh, I got a couple pictures.
According to recent reports, the company is predicting a 90% increase in project completions in 2014 compared to 2013. That's a rather large increase, yeah, 90%.
This picture is not SunEdison. This is Warren Buffett's place. Let me pull it up here.
Warren Buffett's.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness gracious! Look at that.
I can't wrap my head around how big that thing is. Every one of those things is about 6 feet by 12 feet.
Yeah.
And it's as far as the eye can see.
Yeah. I read about one. In fact, I think there's one in our news
Well, there's another
today
one
coming up that would dwarf this.
Well, that's probably this one.
Oh my! Look at
This
that.
one I think is Sun Edison.
That looks like
Yeah,
something.
this is Sun Edison.
That looks like something out of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah. This is real. It's not an artist's conception. This one's
Oh, isn't
real.
that nice? I love those mountains.
Yeah, aren't they pretty?
They're very pretty.
Yeah, this is Sun Edison stated that it expected projects between 50 and 60 megawatts, which they're making now, to remain on its balance sheet in the first quarter of 2014, and between 400 and 500 megawatts for 2014. That's got to be one of these guys.
Man.
I think this one might actually be 550. But that's as big as Yankee.
Well,
Except it's peak.
it's peak. But even so, you know, it's significant. It really is.
I mean, as far as the eye can see.
Yeah. Well, not quite as far, because you can see the mountains.
Well, yeah. The mountains
Okay.
are there.
Installed capacity of solar PV in North and South America combined will increase more than tenfold over coming years, jumping from 13.1 gigawatts in 2013 to 138.8 gigawatts by 2030, according to a new report from consulting firm Global Data, that also from Clean Technica. You know, this would probably be a good time to warn people about numbers, because the Energy Information Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Energy, has numbers for future amounts. Mm-hmm. And if you look at their quote for 2030, it's probably going to be something like 16 gigawatts instead of 138.8. And the reason is because they're constrained to make their numbers according to certain rules, and one of the rules is they can't account for any change unless they know what's going to happen.
So they can't predict.
They can't predict. That's exactly correct.
That
and if
sounds
you look
like
at
they're cooking the books.
almost, but they say what they're producing is not a prediction; it's a baseline against which things can be compared, which is fine. But people treat it as though it were a prediction.
Right.
And it isn't.
It's kind of natural to think that way.
It's what?
Kind of natural to think that way.
Yeah, well, unless you're a gambler.
I got another picture I want to bring up here. I think this might be the same park, because those mountains look almost familiar.
Yeah, they do.
This one was 550 megawatts.
Oh,
It's
my
desert
gosh.
sunlight, so that's what they call this project.
Yeah, yeah. Solar, by the way, does not occupy as much land space as coal, I'm told. And the reason is because of the mining operations for coal.
Mm-hmm. Which you don't see.
You don't see unless you happen to be in West Virginia, or
Then
you see it.
It's quite hard.
That's right, yeah.
As a matter of fact.
Or the same thing with fracking. I mean, they've got fracking fields that's, out in the upper Midwest that is the size of half of South Dakota or something. You know, it's just unbelievable. And there was another one that was in here today. I think it's in today about that, but we'll get to it. If we don't get to it this week, we will get to it next
I
week.
still have that South Dakota.
We were going to do that, and you haven't done it yet. Well, we should.
It's in here. I could find it.
Okay.
If we get time afterwards,
Okay.
we can load it up.
All right. The 10th of March, from the Energy Collective. Energy Collective is interesting because it's just a group of people who are all interested in energy, and they disagree with each other like mad. A decade ago, scientists predicted the specific, unprecedented change in the jet stream that has in fact caused the unprecedented nature of the California drought, and by the way, a cold winter in New England. Now they think the actual situation in the next few decades could become even more dire.
I think I got that one right here.
That's not fun.
This is.
That's the, yeah.
This is just exactly what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
That dark red area is
That's the Central Valley of California. Where
yeah,
they grow everything.
that's where we get our lettuce, folks.
This is the worst part of California to have a drought.
Yeah,
This part over here in the southeast there, that's all desert.
yeah,
That's Death Valley.
yeah. So you're not growing
And they're
things
not in
there.
the drought.
And Nancy Ray Mallory, who is the editor of Green Energy Times, I write for Green Energy Times, so we're on the phone for about an hour a day. Her son lives in the Sierra Nevadas, not far from the Donner Pass.
Yeah.
And he was just saying the ground's bare. You know, I don't know that it is now, but at a point in the winter when they would have 22 feet of snow, the ground was bare. And you know, this is a something that you can project based on that fact that we're going to have a really bad growing season this coming summer in parts of the Midwest, because that's where they get their water from.
This is California as well.
That's California. Folks, that you're looking at, the puddle there,
Well, look what it says.
is the
It's a reservoir.
It's a reservoir for generating hydropower. That's
Folsom Lake, a hydroelectric reservoir in California's Central Valley.
Yeah.
Was so dry in January, a visitor could walk its bed.
Yeah, this is
And
not
in
good.
March, even after the rains, it was still at 39% of capacity. This drought's serious. I'm surprised
Yeah, and
that it really hasn't affected our food prices yet.
oh, it will.
I guess it will. It's just
It
a
will.
lag, just a
Yeah,
time lag.
yeah. We've got to figure out a way of dealing with food. And you had mentioned last week a guy named Crowther, Mark Crowther, who lives in Brattleboro and is into
Crowther, yeah.
into
doing
aquaponics,
aquaponics
and
locally.
we should have him by.
Yeah.
Because you know, food is part of this whole thing. Where are we going to get our food if we've got limited supplies of energy and limited supplies of water? And the aquaponics books that I've read have talked about 40,000 pounds of vegetables and 20,000 pounds of fish per acre in an aquaponics greenhouse that is lighted year round.
Well, what they're basically working at
Yeah.
is something you can build in your house, within your house.
Yes,
You know, and,
you can.
It's a small scale thing,
Yeah,
but you got fish, you got veggies all year round.
that's right. And you're just pumping water from the fish tank into the veggies, and then the veggies clean it up and give it back to the fish again.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a little bit more complicated, but that's it in a
You know,
nutshell.
it's not more complicated. It really isn't. It's a nice system. And
I'll get a hold of him. I don't know him, but I know his parents.
oh, okay. I've met him. He had a thing that a talk
demo.
that he gave up in Bellows Falls,
Yeah.
and we went up and watched that. It was
He's
it
been
was
on
good.
Live and Local a couple of times
Okay,
talking
all
about
right.
it, and he's got a website too. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we should talk to him and see if he wants to come in. I've got a couple people for next week and the week after. And anyway, an ill-advised splurge in large dams across the developing world is likely to saddle countries with big debts, according to Oxford University researchers who found that such projects typically cost nearly twice as much as first estimated and rarely finish on time. And you know, that sounds like the nuclear industry.
Well, it kind of is. I mean, this is the kind of thing that a third world nation is going to say. You know, it's going to put us on the map.
Yeah,
And look what they did in China.
the Three Gorges Dam.
Huge project.
And they've got problems with the geology of the area changing because of the weight of the water they're accumulating. Really, this is
And
difficult.
closer to home, and maybe for different reasons, but from what I understand, Hydro-Quebec has done, and New Brunswick up in northern Canada, we don't see it because there weren't very many people living up there, but
Yeah.
apparently they've done very similar stuff
Really,
and displaced a lot of the First Nations people who lived up there.
well, one of the problems with hydro, the old big dam style hydro, is that you are flooding land that very likely could be used for agriculture or other purposes. If you think about where cities go and where agriculture is done, it's almost all on land that is
Oh, yeah.
relatively flat.
At the time this was going on, that kind of thing was popular, the early 1900s.
Hmm.
Here is, that's what brought Nikola Tesla to America. He wanted to harvest Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
I think he was still in college when he got that dream.
Yeah.
And he succeeded.
Yeah.
He did it.
Brilliant man. Brilliant man.
And then we had Boulder Dam, and we got Hoover Dam, and the
Grand
TVA
Coulee.
and Grand Coulee.
Yeah. TVA is a series of smaller dams than these other ones, but even so,
The same
smaller
concept.
dams. Yeah, and one of the problems with those things also is that it blocks the river.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And a smaller, like a weir, where the river just flows over the top, and it blocks up the water just enough to give you a very low head so you can get a turbine going. The fish will swim in either direction right over that.
Well, we're starting to realize stuff like that now, but back in 1920,
They didn't care.
they needed power, they didn't
Yeah,
care.
they didn't care.
This is about the same time that the city of New York inundated half of the Catskills to get drinking water.
Yes. Well, the Quabbin Reservoir was the same thing.
Same thing, yeah. Yeah. You could see the houses in the bottom of the Quabbin Reservoir.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did it all over the southern Catskills in New York.
Yeah.
And I can't say it wasn't a good thing, but it was a bad thing too. You know, the local people suffered, but the people in New York City had the best drinking water in the world.
Well, some
did.
of us. Yeah, they also have ponds in Central Park.
Yeah. I think they always have.
They use those in emergencies. They don't use them normally.
No, they're not part of the drinking.
They are actually. I've been told.
There's a reservoir in the Bronx called the Jerome Reservoir that's drinking water, but I don't
Okay.
think the Central Park ponds are.
I thought they were. I thought that's why they had
Maybe they are.
fences fencing them off. They
Maybe
can't
they
keep. They can keep the people out. They can't keep the pigeons out. Anyway, on the 11th of March, we got this from an organization called Counterpunch. I usually don't take information from Counterpunch because
They're political.
they're political. But this says, at a House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Energy and Power, one presenter revealed that 36% of the gas byproduct of oil obtained by fracking in the Bakken Shale Basin was flared off as waste during a brutally cold Midwest winter.
There we go. They're wasting a third
Yeah.
of their gas.
Yeah.
They're just throwing it away.
Throwing it away.
And it has negative effects.
It sure
by
does.
by entering the atmosphere.
Well, the one thing that you can say is it's better to flare it than it is to just let it go, because the stuff is
Yeah.
so bad.
Well, yeah, it's going up as CO2 rather than as natural gas.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, when my first view of Saudi Arabia, as I'm flying down there to work for a while, was from the air at night. And I looked down into the desert, and there was fires everywhere,
Oh,
and it was flaring.
yeah.
And 2 years later, they were all gone.
Why was that?
The Saudis collected all of that gas.
Ah, good for them.
They built these things called GOSPs, gas oil separation plants.
Oh,
And they captured all of that and started selling it.
yeah. Good for them.
So inside of 2 years, they basically stopped flaring.
I had a friend who went into Abu Dhabi right after the last fires in Kuwait were put out,
Oh, yeah.
and he said that he flew into Abu Dhabi in a time of year, I think it might have been May, but it was a time when normally everything was very dry. He had never been there during the season when things got wet. And flying in, everything was green. He said it looked like it was as green as Ireland. Flying into Abu Dhabi, the desert was just green.
Yeah, yeah.
And
All artificial.
he talked to the people there, and they said this is something that they were convinced had come about because of the burning. It had changed the weather patterns. Yeah, and it was
This was natural.
No, it was because of the burning.
Yeah, but I mean,
It was
artificial irrigation.
It was nature's response to the burning. Another response farther downwind was that heavy rains hit the Himalayas, and that came down and killed about 250,000 people in Bangladesh.
Wow. I'm not aware of that one.
Yeah, this is
Another interesting thing about Saudi Arabia from the sky, you see it in the daytime. You look down and you see
Big
green
circles?
dots,
Yeah, I've seen those.
green circles.
Yeah,
And they were farms,
Yeah.
dairy farms,
yeah,
where the circle was created by
irrigation.
irrigation pipe.
Yeah, and you can, if you go on Google Earth,
You can see them.
you can see those.
Yeah.
And if you go to the area that's right near the border of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, you can see them just as green dots. And then if you look closely, you can see that, in fact, they're big farms.
Big farms, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the corners that aren't in the circles, they'll have buildings there where the cows can avoid the sun.
Really? How about that? Okay. Well, let's keep going here. Here's some good news about this from Solar Novus Today. About 75% of the people who want solar can't get it. They live in multi-unit buildings, rent, or own homes surrounded by shade trees. Interestingly, states are utilizing community solar to solve this dilemma. Now, Vermont is one of those states.
Yes.
Where people can get together and they can say, we want to have solar power. I live in an apartment, and the person who lives upstairs lives in an apartment, and
We're creating these mechanisms.
right, and we can have a community thing, or we
Yep.
can have a cooperative thing, or there's a bunch of different mechanisms that we can do. The Putney Solar Garden was one of these.
One of these pictures mentions Solarized Greenwich or Greenwich.
Oh, okay.
Solarized is entering southern Vermont.
Yeah, it's
I
all
just-
over Vermont.
I just saw it like last
Yeah,
week. They're
it's-
having
it's
a meeting or something like
All
that.
over Vermont, and I think New
What do
Hampshire
you
too.
know more about it than I do?
Well, I just know about it because I work for Green Energy Times, and so we've got articles on this.
Okay.
And but yeah, and Windham County, that's Tad Montgomery doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ted's quite knowledgeable about this stuff.
he's knowledgeable about a lot of things.
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no flies on Ted.
Okay. With the launch of a wood-fueled downtown district, this I love. Still 6 months away, officials in Vermont's capital city on Monday set the goal of making Montpelier a net zero user of fossil fuels by 2030.
I didn't get any pictures, but I got a little bit of a blurb there.
Well, this is interesting, and this is wood-fueled downtown district heating system. This is, I don't know how similar this is to the biomass thing that they stopped in North Springfield. The sense that I
I
have
think
is
it's
that
much smaller.
this one is
I
smaller.
think so, yeah.
Well, that I think was primarily an electric generating plant.
This is heat and power.
Yeah, and but it also was heat and power, but this thing is different. And it's unfortunate, I think, that people get so upset about biomass, particularly because a lot of biomass is like farm biomass or municipal biomass, where you're dealing with waste that has to be dealt with. Municipal waste or big, huge piles of manure or something like that. And, there's a biomass plant that's going into London, which is, they're spending upwards of $200 million building the plant. And it's going to have one source of fuel, which is restaurants in London.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, my bet is that that's because they can control the quality of the food that goes in there.
Yeah.
But it's just food waste from restaurants that's going into this biomass plant, and they're putting together a transportation system so that they've got something that's the equivalent of dump trucks, where they go to one restaurant after another, pick it all up, and that is biomass as much as wood is biomass.
Absolutely.
And people who oppose biomass as a general thing don't get that. But another thing too is the business of assessing this is extremely complicated. It's not something that you can just do. When somebody talks about a wood stove being 73% efficient, that doesn't mean that it's 73% efficient. in heating your house.
Yeah.
It means that it's 73% efficient in
Converting wood to heat.
in converting wood to heat. But if that heat goes up the chimney, sorry.
Well, you know, talking about collecting all this stuff in the restaurants in London,
Yeah.
when I was a kid, this was normal in Manhattan.
Yeah.
They collected it all. They brought it out to where is now the stadium
Okay.
in Secaucus.
Okay.
That was, we called it, it was called the Farmers' Fields.
Right.
And it was hog fattening. And
Okay.
it stunk. You drive by there, I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah.
And they collected all this stuff from restaurants. This was all done privately, wasn't any government interference at all.
Yep.
But from restaurants in Manhattan, they brought this food out,
But
brought
of
food
course,
scraps out, fed them to pigs, and then they fattened the pigs and sold the pigs back to the restaurants.
which leaves you wondering what happened to all the manure.
Well, that was probably, yeah, that's a good question. Where did it all go?
Well, today, what they would be doing with all the manure is they'd be putting it into biodigesters and turning it into electricity and
They weren't doing
compost.
it then. They probably just
They were
buried
not.
it somewhere.
Yeah. Or dumped it into a river.
Or dumped it into a
Really.
river.
I mean, things have changed in a lot of ways that make them a whole lot better.
Well, I
Okay.
guess the point was back in, what, the 1950s, they had the infrastructure to do that.
Yes. They didn't have the infrastructure to convert the manure to electricity, though.
No, but
That's
I mean, they were
relatively
moving
new.
all of this stuff around.
They were, in
so
fact.
moving it into London to make electricity.
Yes,
This-
absolutely.
This is not new technology.
Yep.
This is not earth-shattering.
Yep. But the idea that Vermont's capital will be net zero, this will be the first net zero state capital in the United States.
Well, this is monumental, really. I mean,
It really
this
is.
is going to be a
And of
thing
course,
people
it's
are looking at.
it's not just wood fired. It's there's a lot going on there. AES Corporation, and I didn't know what AES was. Do you? I had to look it up.
It's a utility. I don't know what specifically AES means.
Well, AES is a Fortune 200 company. This is a big company.
I've got something about them.
They say that Energy Storage Division is selling batteries that are actually powerful enough to replace peaking power. We were talking about peaking power plants earlier, the natural gas plants, which are expensive. And they're replacing them with batteries that are in arrays from tens of megawatts to 500 megawatts, costing $10 million to $500 million. Now, the interesting thing about this is, all of a sudden, solar and wind are no longer intermittent because they've got batteries. And guess what, gang? That's a better match than the
peaking
big
plant.
peaking. Well, better match than the
gas
baseload plants.
I guess it is. Here's AES up on the screen.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Those things in the bottom, those white things, are the
batteries.
Looks like
Amazing.
they're sitting in shipping
Yeah.
containers.
That's what I thought it was when I saw the picture. I didn't read the thing well enough. That just shows you how lazy I
It
am.
could supply power for as long as 4 hours at about $1,000 a kilowatt. That's a dime a kilowatt hour, I guess.
It's
Well, no.
no,
That's
because
not
you can
very
charge them and you can take the power off and recharge them. The cost per kilowatt hour is actually pretty small.
good. They're comparing that to a gas peaker plant at
Yep.
$13.50 a kilowatt.
Yeah. But you know, like all these numbers, you have to be careful how you compare them.
In this particular case, they built the storage and the windmills together,
Yes.
as you can see in the picture.
Yes. Yes.
And somebody was thinking,
Well, I mean, and you could do the same thing with solar. Why
Oh,
not?
yeah.
You
Oh,
could
yeah.
you could have solar on your roof and have a big megawatt battery in your basement.
by the way, I saw a picture, and I didn't capture it. And I don't know if it was an artist's conception or if it was real, but it was a large downtown office building somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, an 80-story, 100-story building. And it had 4 wind turbines on the roof.
Yes.
Large ones.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know where it was or...
Were these horizontal shaft?
No, they were vertical.
Vertical shafts. So
no,
they were
no, horizontal shafts.
horizontal shafts.
Traditional wind turbines like these guys.
Wow. The thing that I've read about those is that they vibrate too much to put on roofs, And you can I mean, it
It
makes.
would seem to me it would resonate, yeah.
Yeah.
So it might have been an artist's concept, but
Well, I'm sure people have done it. It's just a matter of how do you do it. Okay. The spill, this is on the 12th, and this comes from Think Progress. The spill that contaminated the drinking water of 300,000 West Virginians has reignited debate in the state, not just over chemical and coal industry regulations, but how the state's reliance on these industries affects its people and environment.
I don't have anything from that article, but I remember
Big
looking at it.
mess.
It's
Big
boy,
mess.
is it political.
Yeah, it's political, but it's also a big
it's a terrible
mess.
mess.
Oh, let's get out of that one. Same day. This comes from National Geographic. California's hydro plants generated less power in 2013 than they had in 21 years. But the state's water crisis has not turned into an energy crisis, even though, it doesn't say so here, even though 2 nuclear power plants went down too.
Yeah.
Thanks to a mix of renewable energy, natural gas, and planning. And one of these days they'll get rid of the natural gas and then they'll be golden.
We saw this picture before, but it came from that National Geographic article.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's unreal.
Yes, it is. Well, it's sad. Now, today, the 13th, from the Energy Collective, PJM Interconnection, the nation's largest power transmission grid organization, announced last week that solar and wind power could generate 30% of the electricity for its territory by 2026 without any significant issues.
I got a thing up from there. This came from that article.
Okay. And that's what they're talking about.
This is a proposed scenario for California.
This is for California. Well, that is the proposed scenario for their renewable generation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now take a look at the benefits there on the side. This came from that article. 40% less carbon pollution than business as usual.
Yes.
Lower average energy prices across PGM's footprint.
Well, that
That's
makes
what we're
sense.
talking
Yeah.
about here.
You don't have to pay for fuel.
Wind and solar would avoid 15.6 billion in coal and natural gas fuel costs.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay for the fuel.
Yeah.
Duh. Very little additional power, only 1,500 megawatts. That doesn't sound very little to me. Needed to support the minute-by-minute variability of the renewable power, like when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow.
Well, 1,500 megawatts for the state is
In
really
a state, yeah, situation like that,
that's a huge
nothing.
state. That's not a lot of power. That's
This
like
is an important one here. This
Okay.
is good. No additional operating, known as spinning, reserves. No additional spinning reserves needed for backup power. These are the plants that they don't have, that they can't shut off.
yes. Okay.
They call them spinning reserves.
Spinning
They're running all
reserves.
the time,
These are the
they're not
base load
generating
plants.
power.
Yeah.
And they flip the switch when they need them.
Ah.
Because when they need them, they have to be running.
Yeah.
And that's a biggie.
Okay.
And the last one is 44% less gas-fired generation and 21% less coal-fired generation, which also reduces the amount of carbon pollution emitted into the atmosphere.
And also the amount of fuel they're paying for. And
we
there are a
just-
bunch
we
of
covered
things
that,
about
yeah.
this that people don't think about, but they're very, very
The
important.
big picture is very attractive here.
Yeah. When you go to the bank and you say, I need to borrow some money, the bank wants to know the details.
How are you going to pay me back?
Yeah, exactly. If you go in and you say, I'm building a plant that's going to burn coal, or I'm building a plant that's going to burn natural gas, the bank wants to know how you're going to deal with changes in fuel costs.
Oh, sure.
And if you don't have an answer for that, then they're going to be unhappy.
Oh, yeah.
On the other hand, if you go into the bank and you say, I need money to build a solar farm, they want to know how you're going to deal with changes in fuel costs.
There isn't any.
It becomes really easy to talk about, doesn't it? And finally, and we can get back to any of these that Tom wants to, 3 European Union countries have already surpassed their renewable energy goals for 2020. Sweden, Bulgaria,
Who?
Bulgaria, and Estonia. Did you know? I wonder how many people know that there's a country called Estonia.
Oh yeah, it's right up by Finland.
Yeah, it is.
I was just looking at some pictures of it. It's really quite a pretty country.
Yeah, yeah. I know a woman who grew up in Leningrad, and she would go camping.
Which isn't far from there.
No, it's not. She'd go camping through that area and go off in the woods and find mushrooms and stuff. Bulgaria, you know, I had almost my whole life thought of Bulgaria as being an extremely repressive country that was very poor.
Well, they were all behind the Iron Curtain,
Yeah.
and a lot of that was propaganda.
Okay.
And, you know, not that they were living the life of Riley over there. Things sometimes
The only
pretty
people
tough.
who know how to live the life of Riley are the Irish.
Hey, St. Patty's Day's coming up in 2-3 days.
Yeah, you should see the activity on my WeFolk website.
Oh yeah.
It's really funny. Everybody wants to know. I have an article on there about leprechauns and the gold at the end of the rainbow.
Good.
This is an article that describes the leprechaun, that whole story from the leprechaun's point of view.
I got a friend over in Ireland you'd love. He's a Shawnee, a storyteller.
Yeah.
And he tells stories about the wee folk.
Yeah.
He's got 1,000 of them. Well, you know, it's all full of the emotions in his face. He's acting, basically.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
You'd love listening to this
Yeah,
guy.
I'm sure I would. But you know, St. Patrick's Day comes up.
Yeah.
My Vietnamese daughter-in-law, I told her, you know, she was worried about the picture of America as a place where different races don't get along, you know. And I said, you've got to understand one thing about racial relations in the United States. Every year there's St. Patrick's Day. And when St. Patrick's Day comes, it doesn't matter where your ancestors came from. You're Irish.
Yeah, it was commonplace in New York City to see the black people walking around with signs, "Kiss me, I'm Irish."
And you never can tell, they might be.
Well, yeah, I got a friend from one of the Caribbean islands.
Yeah.
His ancestors were Irish.
Yeah?
Well, he's pretty dark, but he's a Rastaman.
He's a what?
Rastaman.
Rastaman?
You know, Rastafarian?
Rastafarian?
Yeah.
An Irish Rastafarian?
Yeah.
By golly, what a thing. Okay, we are coming up on the end of the hour,
Yes, we are.
and we have a couple of minutes.
Well, I got a couple quick pictures here.
Let's do that, and then are you going to do the ones that you were talking about earlier of Baca? Oh, this is all right. Tell us about it.
Well, this is a, what it says there tells it all. Planet Energy is the name of a company.
Okay.
And they're planning to build a series of mini refineries capable of turning trees into high-octane gasoline
Okay.
by a process. They've just developed this new process. It creates a high-tech biofuel. It also creates a high-tech biofuel, biochar,
Biochar.
that allows
There
the
you
soil
go.
to retain more nutrients.
We should do a whole thing on
just on
biochar.
biochar.
Oh, this
I bet
stuff
you
is
we could get somebody
amazing.
in here to talk
Absolutely
about it.
amazing. I could talk about biochar.
Yeah.
I really could. Biochar is a soil amendment that makes the soil fertile permanently.
And basically it's charcoal.
It's basically charcoal, but it's a particular quality of charcoal. It is charcoal that is not just rendered to dust. In order to be really good biochar, it has to be kilned to a low enough temperature that you can still see the structure of the wood.
Oh, okay.
Because you want it to be very porous, and that gives it the ability, first of all, to absorb water like a sponge, and the second thing, it gives it the ability to hold microbes. And those microbes, a lot of them,
That's what does it.
are the sorts of things that convert atmospheric nitrogen into the nitrates that you want to feed your plants. So this stuff, 7,000 years ago, Indians in the Amazon basin, and nobody knows why they did this, were putting biochar into their soil. It may have been just a religious thing,
Yeah.
but it rendered the soil permanently more fertile than the soil around.
Amazing.
So there are all these little places in the Amazon jungle where the soil is fertile, and then of course around it the soil is very infertile. And people have been testing this and showing results that are extremely impressive of permanently altered soil fertility. And of course it means you don't have to use fossil fuels to produce your fertilizer. Now, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody because we've got 24 seconds left. And
Well, how the time flies.
yeah, it doesn't when you're having fun. So we'll say goodbye to everybody who is on a broadcast, and we will invite. I guess we're going to keep talking.
Yeah, why not?
We'll invite to those people who are watching over the internet to continue watching. So
well, we could go.
bye.
Yeah. We could go back to where I was here.
Yeah. Well, you wanted to talk about that thing that had to do with. Was that the same thing? No, it was the Bakken, South Dakota, North Dakota.
That could take the whole hour.
Do you want to do it?
Well,
Or do you want to just do
let's
this?
run through these real
Okay,
quick,
let's
'cause
do it.
This is a view of the proposed refinery down in Alabama.
Okay.
This is Alabama, Port
Okay.
Alexandria. And there is already 9 refineries down there,
Okay.
and they're planning on selling their gasoline or selling their products to blend with the gasoline, which is mandated by the EPA right now anyhow.
Yes.
So they're going to be turning wood into basically motor fuel.
Yes.
This other one, I don't know if did we cover this one already? Well, we mentioned it. We mentioned it. This particular photograph here it demonstrates the use of water in generating energy,
Yes.
and it's all over the place. That's the whole idea of this article.
Yeah.
Resource extraction, which is mining and that kind of stuff. Hydroelectric energy generation.
Right.
Refining. Power plant generation. Bioenergy. Transportation. All of these things use water. And we're not even thinking much about that water.
Some people.
Most of that water isn't usable again.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
It's a one-way stream. I mean, we run it through our plant, it cools the plant, it goes down the river, it's gone. And this particular article was talking about we got to start looking at this.
Well, this is just a matter of sustainability.
Water and energy are inextricably linked and mutually dependent.
Yep.
Water shortages will significantly impact energy supply by both slowing down extraction of raw fuels and production of electricity, not only in hydroelectric plants, but also at the coal, natural gas, and nuclear power plants that require considerable inputs of water.
Now, we were talking about nuclear before.
Mm-hmm.
It's always on water because it needs cooling. When it's too hot out, the plants can't run. When it's too cold out, the plants can't run. When there's not enough water in the stream, the plants can't run. When there's too much water, the plants can't run. Or they have to reduce their output. But this is a problem. That nuclear power, coal has the same problem. Big natural gas plants, not the peaking type, but the baseload type, have the same problem. Wherever you've got thermal power, you've got to cool something.
Got to cool something. Got to have a temperature differential.
And all of those plants are operating somewhere between 35 and 40% efficient. Not all, but almost all of them are in that range. The efficiency of 35 to 40%. It's just the natural effect of the thermal laws. You can extract a little extra power out of them, but you're never going to get past 50%, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that you can even get there. But it means that they're inefficient. Now, nuclear is particularly inefficient. It's the thermal efficiency of nuclear is not very good, but in terms of the energy in the atoms, you're converting less than 1% of the energy that's available in the atoms that can undergo fission into electricity. It's which is the reason why there's so much waste.
Yeah.
So,
something else that I noticed that's related to this mentions the temperature differential.
Yes.
And I was reading an article, and it's fascinating.
Yep.
Old technology, again, old technology that people have forgotten about, but there's a significant difference in temperature in the ocean from the top 100 feet
Yes.
to what's just directly below it.
Yes.
And in at least the tropical and subtropical areas of the world, which are enormous amounts, the potential for generating power is large. And this particular article mostly was talking about building floating generating stations using the temperature differential. It's only about 100 or 200 feet. Run a pipe down to the cold water, take the hot water off the surface, run it through basically what looks like a large Stirling engine, external combustion engine. It's not really combustion, the heat's on the outside, and they turn this thing, they run a turbine with it, or they run a generator with it. And this particular company is talking about building pilot plants, so that's the next step. And they're talking about all these islands in the South Pacific that are running diesel generators right now, and they put one of these things in the backyard, and they're on their own grid. I mean,
That's
the point of this is that there's a lot of people out there that are looking at old technology with new eyes and coming up with stuff that didn't make sense 100 years ago, and all of a sudden starting to make good sense. And this is happening. One of the guys that's looking at this, that I'll bring up next, Warren Buffett, he has been spending a lot of money on renewables.
a lot of money.
And this guy is no fool, as we well know.
$15 billion so far, and he's going to spend more, he says.
He happens to own that railroad, the Burlington Northern.
You notice what the railroad is pulling.
And they're pulling blades for turbines. He probably owns the blades for the turbines, too.
Yep, he probably
owns
does.
the blade. Yeah.
That'll give a piece of people who are watching an idea of how big those blades are.
Yeah, well,
They're longer than the locomotive.
well, this article says that Mid-American, which is his energy concern, now accounts for 7% of the country's wind generation capacity, with more on the way. And their share of solar is even larger.
And he's just one of several people who are doing this. What is the name of that British guy who's also doing it?
Ransom? No, that's... I know, I showed a picture of his island last. Branson.
That's right.
Branson, yeah. Branson, something like that.
And he's helping those people on those islands. You know, part of the problem with islands is in a place where you've got a huge electric grid like we have here, you can move things around, you can move electricity around, you can have nuclear plants,
Right,
you can have big plants.
Transmission lines.
When
They
you're
do
on
have
a
transmission lines underwater too, but they're expensive.
They can, and as a matter of fact, there's a big one going in that's going to go from Scotland to Wales.
Yep. Yeah,
275 miles of transmission line on the bottom of the Irish Sea.
I'll read this one sentence because it makes sense. I didn't bring it up. That's up. I'll bring them back. Come on, you. Buffett's team at Mid-American aren't making these investments in renewables just because they're good for the planet, though I'm sure that does play some role. These investments are being made because they are profitable.
Yep.
And offer other durable advantages and reasonable returns. Mid-American's contribution to Berkshire's 2013 earnings was $1.47 billion. Nothing to sneeze at. That's more than I make in a week.
That's what?
More than I make in a week.
You can buy a lot of burgers for that.
11% for 2012. And this is his one of his solar facilities. So he's gotten in. He's knee deep in energy.
And he's considered to be one of the best minds in the country for investment.
Here's another picture that I wanted to talk about. This I thought was pretty neat too. This company is Dow Chemicals.
Never heard of them.
They are out with a solar shingle.
Yeah.
This is a picture of the solar shingle that's installed on a roof. It's a dual functioning system offering superior aesthetics over rack mounted solar panels and certified as both a roofing and a solar product.
Right.
A complete turnkey package that includes a custom designed system for each home and the inverter to convert DC to AC, the utility connection so that credit is obtained for the utility. Looks like they're offering a nice turnkey package here.
It does. My guess is that's going to be kind of expensive. But when you consider the cost, you have to consider that it's giving you solar power, but it's also replacing a roof.
Yeah.
You know.
And
so
it doesn't look like it's a roof that's going to have to be replaced soon.
And that's a very important point.
Moving along, here are a couple of pictures bringing us up to date on Fukushima.
Yeah.
That picture on the left was taken in March.
Yes.
Well, I guess it was taken in February, but it's still
A mess.
still looks like a disaster.
Yeah.
And the guys on the right are a team there that's getting ready to go to work on it. I was at a meeting, I guess it was Sunday night. A Japanese lady spoke, and they're really having difficulty finding workers that will do this.
Yes.
They got contractors out there that are basically taking homeless people off the street
Yes.
and putting them in this. They're not paying them much money. It would seem to me they would attract people if they paid them more money.
Well, that unfortunately is part of the thing that they've been notorious for in this whole thing.
Unfortunately.
They've had organized crime involved in getting people.
She mentioned that, the Japanese mafia. She actually used that term.
Japanese mafia.
Yeah, she actually used that term.
Yeah.
I won't bring up a picture because there's nothing about it, but I'll just say what it says. A widespread customer defection from the electric grid is possible by 2025.
Yes.
This is talking about people
Ordinary people.
turning on, calling up the power company saying we don't need you anymore.
Well, you know, I think from a certain point of view that's a little short-sighted.
I think so too. But what they're talking about is individuals making their own decisions.
Yes, they are.
This isn't a movement.
We've had people in Vermont who have been off-grid all along.
Well, that's a slightly different thing. They're off-grid because, A, they want to be off-grid, or maybe the cost of bringing power to their house is so prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
So they've stood alone.
Yeah.
This article is about people who presently have power.
Yeah.
And they're saying, I'm going to invest the money in solar, and I'm going to say goodbye to you.
Yeah.
And in places where the utilities are making it difficult for people to do this, they're getting resistance, and people are going to say sayonara.
Yes. Well, that is a very good point. If the utilities are going to play hardball with people who are just trying to protect their resources, including the world, they're going to have to expect pushback on that.
Now, this is the takeaway from this. A considerable number, this came from the Rocky Mountain Institute, by the way.
Okay.
A considerable number of utility customers likely will see favorable defection economics within 10 years.
Yes. I think, you know, I think that is an important point. I mean, Nancy Ray Mallory, who's the editor of Green Energy Times, lives in a house that's 100% renewable, with the exception of a small amount of propane, which she uses, I think, for cooking, but she has other ways of doing things. But basically, it's, aside from that, 100% renewable, and it has been for years. And a large part of it was honestly because that's what she wanted.
That's okay, too.
But part of it was it would have cost $30,000 to get the grid to the house.
Yeah, that's what I just mentioned. The exorbitant cost.
This is really expensive. It costs thousands of dollars for every utility pole.
Yep.
And if you're half a mile from the grid, you
can't afford it.
You can't afford it unless you've got huge amounts of money.
Now, the second point here is utilities will likely experience significant revenue decay before defection. And the third one is the likelihood of favorable long-term customer defection signals the eventual demise of traditional utility regulatory models, which means they got to turn around and figure out a better way of doing things.
This is one of the things I like about Green Mountain Power, is that if you talk with those people up there, they're looking at alternate models.
they're very progressive in that field.
I-
They're looking at it and they're saying, this is the way of the future, we're going to get on board. Instead of digging their feet into the ground and saying, no, which is happening in other states.
They're helping Montpelier
Yep.
become 100% fossil fuel free. Now, from Green Mountain Power, that's not all that difficult because
They don't make much of their own power.
they don't make much of their own power, and the power that they're buying is mostly fossil fuel free.
Now, this is an interesting quote. This had nothing to do with anything that you saw, you posted, but I picked it up and I want to repeat it. It's not up on the screen.
Oh,
I mean, I can put it up, but I'll just read it.
just read it.
As is now widely recognized, preventing climate change from reaching its most catastrophic potential requires keeping 4/5 of known carbon reserves, coal, oil, and gas, in the ground.
Yep.
The owners of those reserves, those giant energy corporations, and states like Russia and Canada that might as well be giant energy corporations, have no intention of letting that happen. This is a scary prediction, and I don't know if she's right.
This is why the Russians, the Ukraine, that whole thing is playing out the way that it is.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians supply 40% of the natural gas for Europe. And they want to be able to use that fact for political leverage.
I'm pulling up the...
Meanwhile, the Europeans are thinking about the idea of how do we get off this Russian natural gas. It's making natural gas really kind of unpopular in Europe.
I don't think anybody on this side of the pond knows what's really going on over there.
You're probably right. I read an article that I didn't post today about natural gas in Estonia.
Uh-huh.
And they have apparently huge natural gas reserves that they have been fracking for a long time. I think they've been mining shale and then extracting it from the mined shale. And they're giving up on this.
So they haven't been fracking, they've been mining the shale and then fracking it in the...
You're right. It wasn't fracking. They were mining, it was oil shale.
Yeah.
No. And it was not fracking. They were getting it out.
Are they burning the oil shale, or are they getting the gas out of it?
Getting the oil out.
Getting the oil out of it, yeah.
And they had something like 17% of European oil shale.
Wow, that's a lot.
In that country. I think it was Estonia. I get Estonia and Lithuania and Latvia all,
Everybody does.
you know, in my mind. But they were...
The Baltics.
Yeah. They were, and of course the Baltics are difficult too because you hear ball and you're thinking kins,
Balkans?
so you have the Balkans and the Baltics, and it's all confusing. Next thing you know, I won't be able to tell the difference between Latvia and Bulgaria. But they have come to the point where they are, in effect, decommissioning the oil shale facilities that they've got, and it's a mess.
You mean trying to clean them up?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
It's a big problem. Yes. What do you got there?
Well,
That looks
I
like
got
the-
the North Dakota project up there.
Oh, man.
I'll bring that one up. I think we've got time to go through this.
Now look at this. This project, the red part of the project, is about the size of North Dakota. It looks like it might be a little bit
Yes,
small.
it pretty much is. The whole thing is called the Williston Basin, and I guess there's hydrocarbons throughout it. But the Bakken Shale is where the mining is going on right now. 99% of that is within the northwest corner of North Dakota. Some of it's going on in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that any of it's going on in Montana yet, but it might be.
Do you have any pictures of this from space at night?
I don't. Not here. I don't anyhow.
I've seen pictures of this from space at night, and what they're doing is they're comparing areas of northwest North Dakota in terms of light that's being given off with places like Minneapolis.
Yeah. Wow.
And, you know, it's...
Well, let's see what else. This is all a picture show.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of words, and I'm not going to stop at the words. We'll stop at the pictures. We'll look at some of the explanations of the pictures. This is an old school, abandoned school in Williston, North Dakota.
Okay.
And in the background, you can see an active oil well.
Yep.
Yeah, let's see if I can read it a little bit better. Yeah. And it says the economic boom has brought industrial development and pollution threats to a once quiet rural region of the upper Midwest.
Yes.
Okay, I'll go to the next one. This is, I think it's a different site. Yeah, this is a different site, but it's just a picture of the oil wells. You know, you can see a couple of these walking beam engines there pulling the oil, they're pumps, pumping the oil out of the ground in these tanks that are collecting them. This isn't horrible right now yet. At least 5 oil well sites line this country road west of Williston. Okay, the next one is, this is at night, but it's from the ground, it's not from the sky. Trucks, tanks, and 24-hour work around a new well site where water and fine sand will fracture the shale. More than 2 million gallons of water and 3 million pounds of sand are used per well.
Ugh.
They stick the sand in there so that when they fracture the rock, it stays fractured.
Doesn't heal. They want the ground not to heal. Now this picture that you're going to, that's flaring.
Yep.
And that happens because in order to capture the natural gas, they have to, in order to be able to capture it economically, they have to have the amount of methane in the gas that comes up be greater than a certain percent. At least this is my understanding. And if it's less than that, they don't capture it because it's not economically feasible, but they do need to get rid of it, so they burn it.
So they burn it. Well, they're starting to get a wrap around that, but it won't happen until it's economically feasible.
Well, that's the way things are.
They're going to burn it.
Yeah, that's the way things are.
Let's read a quick bit about what it says. A high decibel screeching roar of this gas flare blasting from a pipe at an oil well is repeated at more than 1,500 wells across the Bakken, throwing off enough light to be seen from orbiting satellites. That's just what you just said.
Yes, that's right. And it looks like a big city. It looks like a bunch of big cities, all kind of spread all over.
3 times more gas is flared now than 3 years ago. Wow. This is just
pipes.
Just a picture of a pipe storage area.
And an oil well.
And an oil well, yeah. An oil boom is also a job boom.
Yep.
Dakota has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation at 2.6%.
And I'm just as glad that I'm not dealing with that area because I'm sorry, I wouldn't want to be there.
Here's a couple of local people. Agriculture ran our state forever. Now it's oil. Out for an early evening meeting in a cafe, Renee Evansvold and Kristen Mesker are ranchers and farmers north of Tioga. Renee on the left is a biologist who previously worked for the Federal National Resources Conservation Service and the Fish and Wire Service. She grows wheat and raises 300 head of cattle on 2,000 acres. That's a pretty big farm.
Yeah, it's a little over
it's
3.
Little out there.
Huh?
Small out there.
Well, yes and no. The area that I lived in Illinois, there was a standard farm size, which was 160 acres, or multiples thereof.
Yeah. 160 acres was what you got a grant for.
Yeah, that was the homesteading thing,
yeah.
and people would occasionally, after they acquired the land,
they would. You could get 4 of them.
Well, that may be. 160 acres is exactly a quarter of a square mile.
Yeah, so a family could get 4 and they'd own a square mile.
These things, if it's 3,000, what was it, 2,000 acres?
Yep.
That's about 3 square miles. So you're talking about a farm that's a mile wide and 3 miles long.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, it will give you some exercise to ride your bike around it.
Now, that's just a picture of the trailer park.
Yes, with a
And
big
there's a big
industrial.
test gas processing plant.
Yeah. Yeah.
The county seat has grown 50% from 12,000 people to more than 18,500 since 2006. Housing is tight and high-priced. Sewer and water systems are straining. Some communities don't have enough restaurants or gas stations to serve the new residents. Many of the oil workers come alone and live in construction housing known as man camps, making it hard to know how many people are in the area.
The nuclear industry does that too.
Yeah, they do.
They do that when
Not
the
quite as bad as this. But
no,
yeah.
it's not, and
But when they're
they're
refueling, there's a whole bunch
yeah,
of people come in and out.
and you know, I moved into Plymouth, Massachusetts, just at the time that the Plymouth Yankee nuclear power plant was the Pilgrim nuclear power plant was being refurbished, and I think there were 2,000 high-paid jobs in town because of that. It was very hard to find a place to live.
Now here they're talking about tanker trucks and construction traffic backing up the tiny town of Ray, North Dakota.
That can be a problem.
Another symptom of the back and oil boom. You think the log trucks on Main Street here are bad, huh?
Yeah.
Heavy truck traffic has stunted during the past 4 years. The road will service more than 5,400 wells. I bet you they got a lot of pretty bad road conditions right now. Potholes.
I would imagine, but of course their winter might have been a little kinder than ours. I don't think it was,
North
though.
Dakota. They
Yeah,
don't
it's
have
probably
nice
pretty
winters.
cold.
Now here's a picture of
The upper Midwest had a bad winter, as I recall.
a rail spur with some restored buildings housing a museum. That's what it used to be. That's grain silos, wheat elevators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, here's a little subdivision with the train tracks running right by you here.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a picture. There's a couple of hundred cars on that.
And these are carrying fracked oil, which is full of gas, which makes it very dangerous.
As we've already found out already.
Mm-hmm.
Already we found that out already.
That horrible derailing and explosions in Canada, apparently they were carrying the fracked oil.
Carbonated.
It's like it was carbonated,
Yeah.
except it was methane instead of carbon dioxide. So when it started fizzing like root beer, it put this methane into the atmosphere, and it didn't take very much to make that into an explosion, and it killed 47 people, as I recall.
Well, these rail cars weren't built for that. They're built for oil, but they weren't built for fizzing oil.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a program out now to replace all those rail cars, but that's going to take years.
Well, the EPA has warned on it, and I'm not so sure about the Keystone XL pipeline either, because I don't know how well that's going to handle this stuff.
And I just ended this to fly home a little bit. To ease your eyes, let's visit a wind product in Searsburg, Vermont.
Yep,
Haystack Mountain visible in the background.
I've been there.
I would rather see that than that.
Mm-hmm.
That's it in a nutshell.
And of course, this thing you can't see from outer space.
Say what?
You can't see that from outer space.
I don't think you can.
You can certainly
Get a
see
good
the
telescope.
flaring. You can see the flaring in the oil fields.
So that's the end of my North Dakota presentation here.
Well,
Let's see if I got anything else I want to bring up.
one of these days I'm going to do a harangue on nuclear power.
Uh-huh. Well, there's one here, but it's very technical. Is ammonia the holy grail for renewables? That's a technical thing, but it was
Burning ammonia.
well, burning it or using it to save hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out it's once you've got the hydrogen in ammonia, it's much more energy efficient to get the hydrogen out of ammonia than it is to get it out of water.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, you can burn it. under certain conditions. You can burn a diesel engine under high compression. Just plain ammonia. By the way, ammonia is not the stuff you buy in a bottle.
That's ammonium hydroxide, and it's a weak solution.
A weak solution of real ammonia is pretty nasty stuff.
I've handled it.
Have you? Yeah.
It's like ammonia and, what is it, hydrazine? Hydrazine is nasty stuff, too. Hydrazine.
Sounds nasty already.
Getting a tiny drop of hydrazine on you feels like getting a tiny drop of nitric acid. But ammonia and hydrazine, you have a pipe of ammonia and a pipe of hydrazine, you pipe them into each other, and that, if you've got it in a nicely shaped chamber, that's a good rocket engine.
Okay.
You don't need to light anything, they just go.
They just go, the rocket takes off, huh?
That's right. But ammonia is, well, of course, ammonia is a gas, at least under normal atmospheric pressure, but it's got just amazing characteristics. They have that. Have you ever tracked through the ammonium, the absorption cycle that's used for refrigerators?
I haven't.
Oh, Tom, you should do this. Have you ever wondered how you can have a propane power refrigerator?
No.
You light a fire, and that makes everything cold.
Yeah.
All right? It's absolutely mind-boggling. And how somebody could have figured this out is just, it's almost unimaginable that somebody could look at this and say,
It's counterintuitive, but it works.
But it works. And what they're doing is they're taking ammonium hydroxide and boiling it.
Okay.
Now, you run this off into a chamber where you've got the capacity for the ammonia. You've got a condenser in the chamber, and of course the first thing to condense is the water. The ammonia doesn't want to condense; it wants to be a gas.
Yeah.
All right. So that separates the water from the ammonia. It turns out that's not a difficult thing to do. Then the ammonia goes into another chamber where there's hydrogen. And since you've got this ammonia constantly running, it keeps pushing into that chamber so the hydrogen doesn't come out. But when the ammonia goes in with the hydrogen, it condenses because it thinks, because hydrogen is so light, that the pressure is low, even though it isn't. I didn't know that about the gas laws, but apparently it works. And this means that the ammonia condenses, you can combine it with the water and reboil it. But in the process of condensing, it makes it really, really cold.
Okay.
It just blows my mind to see that kind of thing.
One summer I spent as a good humor man.
As a what?
Good humor man, ice cream peddler.
Okay.
And these trucks were cooled by ammonia. When you pulled them into the barn at night, some guy hooked them up to pipes on the ceiling. And all night long they ran cooled ammonia through these things to get them cold. And then that stored the cold all day.
Wow. Well, ammonia has characteristics that are kind of like water in terms of the thermal mass. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to heat it up. It's very, very hard to cool it off. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't know about thermal mass. But if you were to take a little tiny block of ice, 1 gram of ice, all right? 1 gram of ice is a cubic centimeter of water.
Okay.
A centimeter is about 4/10 of an inch.
Yep.
If you took that as ice, but at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius, and you put energy into it that will melt it, bring it up to 100 degrees Celsius, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and then convert it to steam, the amount of energy that you put in there is absolutely mind-boggling. All right? Part of the reason for this is because it's not easy to melt ice.
The change of state.
Change of state.
Yeah.
It's also not easy to boil water. And if you were to take a piece of steel that was 1 gram at just below 0 degrees Celsius and put the same amount of heat in there, you wouldn't be able to see it because it would be glowing too bright. So you can store heat in water.
Yeah.
which is
People do.
people do, and it's a very much better thermal mass than rock, which people also use for storing heat. It's a very much better thermal mass. The only problem with it is that it can leak. The water, can run out. The rock won't do that. It'll pretty much usually stay in place. But water is just amazing.
Well, I know a passive solar setup.
Yeah.
Where the room that was storing the heat for the passive solar to be circulated through the house consisted of a whole bunch of 55-gallon drums painted black filled with water.
Yes. Well, I've told you about our greenhouse.
Yeah.
And the greenhouse has got a 300-gallon tank, 350-gallon tanks, one 100-gallon tank, and they're just sitting in there. No heat, just soaking up the sun. Now, this winter was really brutal. And when you have brutal weather combined with a lot of cloud cover, you lose a lot of heat. But all of those tanks froze. None of them froze solid.
Wow.
They had ice on the top.
Yeah.
None of them was solid.
But they weren't solid.
And the one tank that had our big goldfish in it, the ice never got thicker than about an inch. And of course, the goldfish don't care. They just don't care. If there's an inch of ice on the water, they don't care. The water gets so absorptive of oxygen at low temperatures that they can get a multi-month supply of oxygen into the water because their metabolisms are down to practically nothing. And so they don't eat. Come spring, they're not hungry. They haven't lost weight.
Do they move? They swim? Or
they swim. Hang out? They just swim, but mostly they just hang out. And you don't see them a lot in the winter because they hang out down at the bottom. One of the things that's interesting about water is that it's not densest at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it's densest at 37. And so you can predict if you've got a large...
I didn't know that.
Yeah. You can predict if you've got a large body of water what the temperature is going to be at the bottom.
Yeah.
You see. If it's shallow, you don't know. But the point is these tanks would absorb whatever heat was available during the daytime, and they'd lose it at night, but they never froze solid. Because even though we had really, really cold nights, and in the middle of overcast weather, water is not easy to move the temperature of. Now, you can use that, as you said, 55-gallon drums to heat your house. And people do that.
Well, this particular room, on top of the 55-gallon drums, they had growing beds.
Yeah.
So they grew veggies in there.
Yeah.
And it never got cold in that room.
Was this a greenhouse or a solarium or something? Big windows?
It was all windows.
Yeah.
It was basically a passive solar system.
Oh, okay.
And it was at SIT.
Okay.
And they had built these kind of Venetian blinds out of 2-inch thick insulation. So one of the students had a work-study job to raise them up every day, let the sun in, then lower them at night and keep the heat in.
Did you know, by the way, that Venetian blinds were invented in Venice?
I guess I never gave that much thought. I guess I always assumed it.
Yeah. I remember running into that one when somebody said, where do you suppose these things came from and when? It turned out they were invented in Venice a long time ago. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Okay, Tom, I think we're running low on information to give people here.
Yeah, I think we are.
Or either that or energy. I think it's energy, actually. We're running low of human energy. So I think maybe it's time to fold up our tent and get out of the way of the next people coming in for use of the studio. So
I think so.
We will say good night, goodbye, good day, good whatever it is.